Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's really great to have lots of you here, and there's lots of people already on Twitch and YouTube waiting for us to start. I'm joined today by Cameron Balahan. Hi, Cameron. How you doing?
Hello. Nice to meet you, Jeremy.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, great to have Cameron here. So, for those of you that don't know, this is part of Exercism's 12 in 23 campaign, encouraging people to try 12 different programming languages throughout 2023. And this is specifically part of Mechanical March, where we're looking at systems languages. We've already had Josh Triplett from the Rust team talking to us about Rust, and today we're focusing in on Go. If you're not familiar with Exercism, if you found this through Cameron or through Go or through Google, then Exercism is a free, non-for-profit learn to code website where we teach people different programming languages. It's not really for beginners. It's more for experienced developers learning new programming languages or going deeper. It's totally free. Come join in. And if you're enjoying this content, please consider donating as well, because that's how we survive. Also, just want to do a shout out to GoBridge as part of this. GoBridge are one of our supporters. We're the official mentoring platform for GoBridge and for the Go Developer Network. If you want to improve your Go skills, come use Exercism and send your solutions to our mentors who would love to help you for free. It's a great way to improve your skills. So today we're going to be chatting with Cameron a little bit about Go. As you can see by the nice little title under Cameron's name, Cameron's the product lead for Go at Google. So we've got maybe a slightly less technical interview today, although Cameron's still a developer, but looking a lot about sort of Go as a programming language, where it fits into ecosystems and how it's used, its past development and its future as well. So really excited to have Cameron here. Final thing before we start chatting, we've got a sort of AMA, Ask Me Anything section at the end, but please feel free to ask questions throughout this. Those questions will get passed on to me and I'll ask them to Cameron. The more questions you ask, the better, the more interesting different areas we can poke and explore. So yeah, either on Twitch or YouTube, please just post in the comments there and they'll get those passed to us. So hey Cameron, how's your day been going so far?
It's going well. I'm very excited. Thank you for having me. This should be fun. So I'm looking forward to all the questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. So for those of you that don't know, Cameron, he's product lead at Go, as I said. But I know you've had an interesting career journey so far, Cameron. You messaged me beforehand when we were chatting and said you started in law and then you moved into doing some sort of trading stuff and then you ended up at Google. I think one of the things that I know a lot of people really feel is like Google is one of the places that they would love to get to as a company. It's like the gold standard place to work for a lot of developers. So I think people will be really interested in hearing what that journey was like for you, from like starting coding all the way through, and understanding a bit about what it actually is like to work at Google in general.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let me just tell it to you chronologically, and then I can finish up with what it is to work at Google. So I actually started sort of programming as a kid, like in the mid 90s. I started with Visual Basic. I eventually found my way to C++ and Java, especially in college. And then, after college, I kind of had this feeling where I really wasn't ready to work yet. I've always kind of been a curious person, maybe, and maybe not as focused as I ought to be. So I thought maybe I could go to law school where they don't really care what your undergrad major was. I was a CS major, and I was like, this would be an interesting shift. It's a whole new thing to learn about. So I decided I'd go to law school. And I had this misconception that if I went to law school, I'd be like this guy who knew all the rules and, like reading the inside of the box of a board game. And that's not really true. But it is super interesting. And I think generally law school was more interesting than being a lawyer. But when you're in law school, it's real easy to sort of accidentally find yourself becoming a lawyer because, they come recruit you and whatever else. And so next thing I knew, I was like far away from anything tech related. I was a securities litigator at a big New York City law firm, sort of dealing with all sorts of like securities fraud cases. That's the litigation part of it. But I kind of knew right away that this was not what I wanted to do long term. which is, you know, a bit empowering, maybe a little bit not in that you feel you're not doing the thing that is what you want to do, but also you're like, well, you know, this is just a temporary thing. So what I was doing is I'd still tinker at home a lot, like I just try to build stuff. And back then I would write a lot of Java. It was just what came naturally to me. And then I got this idea where I kind of got intrigued by the world of like market microstructure and market making, high frequency trading. And you know, this is like back in like 2008 when crisis is happening. There's a lot of like stress on the different elements of the financial marketplaces, and so I started kind of like getting data from sources, running it through like a little program I'd written, and I got a friend of mine from college to kind of get interested in this too and join me. And next thing I knew, I kind of like had been doing this for years, just while I was working, just sort of doing it at home. And I was like, I think I'd like to try to raise some money and try this for real. Which, in hindsight, probably like I got very lucky. I think that I didn't just fail outright. I think the sort of conditions were ripe and everything. It probably wasn't the best move, but it did work out. And so we grew this business into a full-fledged market-making firm in U.S. equities. And we sort of expand a little bit by selling these sort of SaaS solutions, try to diversify our revenue, and, got to rebuilt the whole application in C++. Java was giving us a lot of problems, or we spent a lot of time sort of tuning it to kind of be the way we wanted it to be. But we realized that probably wasn't the right approach. So, that's just sort of 10 years of my life there. Eventually, I had an opportunity to sell the business to a competitor. And so, my people got to go with that sell to the new company. And I had the opportunity to break from it, which, I thought about it and it was like, yeah, it's been 10 years. I've been doing the same problems. The same feeling of like a lack of focus kind of took over a little bit. And I was like, I'd really love to do something different. Like these problems are hard problems. I like hard problems, but they're the same problems. And I wonder if there's a new sort of world of other problems out there. And so a friend recommended, you ought to try Google, be a product manager at Google. It's not dissimilar to what you've done, but it is a whole new slew of problems. And that's where I someone referred me. I applied to Google. It's got that rigorous interview, which is very doable if you set your mind to it. And so I joined as a product manager about 2 years and 10 months ago, something like that. And I joined. I started in Google Cloud, where I was charged with our programming languages strategy in a part of cloud we call developer experience, where we're just thinking about things like the SDK and the different integrations we have across different programming languages. So my job was to think about what languages Google Cloud ought to support and what it means to support them. That's a lot of fun and interesting. But the language that was the most interesting of the languages we support in Google Cloud and that we really do our best to maintain as first-class citizens on Google Cloud was Go. And we own Go top down. And at the time, Steve Francia was the product lead for Go. I was like, in addition to all the other stuff I did, I was on the Go team, but only in a part-time capacity. And that's where I first learned about it. I first got introduced to Russ and the rest of the team, Samir, others. It's a really great team. I just take my word for that. They're like the rock stars within Google. So I love that part of it. And when the opportunity came for Steve to sort of move on, I just grabbed this with two hands. And that was about a year ago now that I am now the product lead of the Go project at Google. Nice. So I guess that brings me here. What it's like, that second part of your question. I think it's like, first of all, I haven't worked at another sort of place like So I don't know. I don't know how to compare it, but I will say that it does live up to a lot of its hype. It also, like everything else, gets a little bit like, you know, well, this is the norm now, and you just sort of get used to it. But there is definitely a honeymoon period where you're like, wow, there are so many smart people here, and this business is so cool because the scale of the whole thing. It's like Google's everywhere. It's so interesting to see how a business like this is run, and then trying to learn how to sort of align your own projects with that bigger behemoth of a business. And I guess like, and I don't say this to because I've like drank too much of the Kool-Aid or anything, but I think the thing that I really felt is I was impressed, and I continue to be impressed with how Google does things. It's like this interesting place where it actually cares about the end user, and not just because it's altruistic, but because its business is to care about what happens to the internet, to the whole sort of technology world. Like Google's business is that business, and it's good for Google for that business to be healthy and in all the good ways. So it's been cool to have like a job where I'm like leading something that I think will endure well beyond me. That is something that's like that I'm passionate about, that I think is really important. And in the context of this company, that's so like important. Not to sort of oversell it, but it's Google, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So what exactly is it that a product lead does for a programming language? I mean, I think, we've chatted to the creators of Elixir and Gleam so far in the series, who are both, one person creators of a language effectively, and lots of other people have helped, but, they've set that vision. And then we chatted to Josh last week, who's part of, at Rust. There's lots of different teams that do lots of different things. With Go, it's obviously different. It's a language that's owned by a company, I guess, and there's going to be different people doing different bits. What is it that a product manager, what's their role in that for a programming language?
It's weird. I always struggle answering this question, actually. It's like if you're a product manager of some product that has like a P&L, and you kind of think about like, well, how do I increase the revenue from this thing, or at what cost, whatever. It's a little more straightforward. With something like Go, a programming language, for one, I think there are very few places that can actually own a programming language. Google happens to be one of those places, but you wouldn't see like a startup emerge where it's the only thing they do. Or I mean, you might, but in a different sort of like. It would be unusual. So within being a PM on Go, I think I see it as two different things. The first is, how do I align Go and our strategy, our roadmap, our messaging internally with our internal priorities? And that's like a lot of sort of like looking at what our leadership is looking to, what are their priorities, and ensuring that the work that we're doing aligns with it, and that it's reflected to those leaders, like that the right metrics are being measured and then set forth in front of those leaders, and that we're telling a story that like aligns with what they are looking for, at this leadership level, and one that is kind of like able to integrate across other Google priorities. So thinking about what are these other teams doing? Where are opportunities for us to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts? So I'd say like that chunk is like that internal alignment, it's got a bureaucratic element. I think whenever you gather like huge groups of people, especially like smart people together, you might end up with some of this. And so that part's, it's pros and cons to that part, but it's necessary, and it is. There is a lot of like, what is your ability to put together a vision that aligns with those things, with the internal.
So how much is like the direction of Go set to be aligned with Google's priorities? What's the process that goes through? Like if I'm a Elixir user, if you like, I might put a GitHub issue open saying I'd like this feature, or do a PR to add a feature, and there's sort of, I guess, a very transparent way of adding that. It sounds like Go has much more of a roadmap and much more of like a a bigger plan, and that's, I guess, more aligned, as you say, to like how Google is perceiving their priorities. How does that work with like the community using Go versus Google's internal priorities? How does that sit?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's complicated. So, I think the first way to answer that, and by the way, to the previous question, I want to return to that because there's an external element as well. But let's answer this real quick. So, I think one of the ways to answer this is to think about like, what does Google get out of Go to begin with? And I think there's a couple of ways to look at this. One is like, what is the value of owning a mainstream language like Go? So one that is hopefully loved by a community of developers, and that's something that we try to do, right? And I think the simplest answer to that is that these developers, should they like love Go and think that this is like something that they're entrusting their careers, their products, their businesses in, well, they'll trust Google more, and then they'll trust Google's developer products more. And GCP is one example of that. Creating that sort of affinity and developer connection is something Google wants to do. Maybe has not done as successfully as like Microsoft or some other examples, but is definitely within its thing, like list of priorities, because we do a lot of stuff for developers directly. The more sort of nuanced explanation is what I said at the start, where Google is this unusual place. It's one of these few places that really cares about the internet as a whole being successful, because not because Google's altruistic, because that's actually what eventually translates to business value. So, for example, we want more startups to be able to efficiently create products that they then end up advertising on Google or launching in the, Android Play Store or hosting on Google Cloud. And in general, we want all software to be more secure, for there to be fewer hacks that are, in the news, so that customers of all sorts across everywhere on the internet feel more comfortable using products that are electronic and aren't skeptical of them or mistrustful. And what I think is probably the most important thing that Google gets out of all of this is that it's important for Go to be this sort of exemplar for what we as Google think good software engineering ought to look like. We want other languages to copy that. We want to set this bar so that, all software engineering sees this great example and goes like, we want to go in that direction, and if we can influence the direction that way, we can ensure it doesn't go somewhere else, somewhere that doesn't benefit our business in that really long strategic long term. Another side of this is, well, what happens if Go isn't there? Like the sort of negative argument. What if like some entity was, creating something like Go, but they're not sort of living up to the values that we want? There's that risk of them taking it somewhere that then it becomes an actual operational cost for Google, but also it might pan out in like fewer startups being successful if the, just as an example, if the language is too burdensome or there's too much sort of red tape around it, well, that might make it harder for startups to emerge. That might make the whole internet economy slower, and that would affect Google. So to your question of like, well, how do we sort of think about all of that, or how do we align it? Honestly, we think mostly about the external use. Like, how do we grow adoption among users everywhere? Not the users who end up using Google products, but users everywhere. And that is by far the first priority, and I think Google leadership is pleased when Go continues to grow, Go continues to set these examples that we think are important. Those are the things that matter there. But there is that other piece, which is like, well, we are a business as well. And how do we make sure that sort of like, for example, on Google Cloud, that Go developers get a first-class experience there? Google's this massive company. Maybe the product owners in Google Cloud doesn't occur to them to think about how a Go developer might have an affinity for Google Cloud, and then to actually have that thing ready for them when they're there. So, pushing on that would be one example, or thinking about like how we can tell the story better internally so that we can get our leadership to fund certain initiatives that we think are important to our end users. So I think that's the answer. I know it's not clear. It's not clear to me either. It's something that I sort of wrangle on a day-to-day basis.
To take a question that someone asked just on YouTube that I think is maybe an example of this that's interesting just to reason through. So the question was, are there any plans to add multidimensional slices into Go so that it opens doors to scientific computing, machine learning, AI? So putting the sort of detail of the question aside, just thinking that through, if there's like areas like that the community are looking, they're wanting to be able to use multidimensional slices so they can do machine learning stuff. How does that like process work? Is that something that you as like a product manager would identify that the community are wanting, or that you're seeing a need for amongst Google developers? Is there like like what's the process that new features get added? Is there like a philosophy that you hold it up against? Yeah, I'm just interested in just take that as an example of how that might work as a.
So there's certainly a proposal process, and
Okay.
one that Russ Cox leads, and that goes through the whole Go community. And so
Mhm.
there's feedback from everybody. It's a consensus-driven thing there.
Okay.
So that is purely like a what an open, that's an exemplar again here, where
Mhm.
we're trying to be an exemplar of an open source project and how we
Mhm.
ought to run it through feedback from the community. So
Mhm.
that is kind of independent of product,
Mhm.
although product is on everyone's mind, because we're all aware that we also need to think about whatever else is sort of prioritized within the
Mhm.
greater Google. But I think that stands apart. It's like, what do the engineers really, the
Mhm.
engineering leadership of Go, think is feasible, is a good idea? That's kind of the visionary work of Russ and others, but also through this feedback process and proposal
Mhm.
process. But now, like on this AI slices bit, like it's something that that in particular is something that we have discussed. It's not, I don't have like any sort of additional detail to it than anything you may see like in any like open proposal process or anything like that. But it is something we talk about, because as Google as a whole, and really the industry as a whole, is trying to think about where this AI thing is going. What is the sort of paradigm shift that we should anticipate? And
Mhm.
that's where the product question comes in.
Mm.
How does this align with like some strategy? Like if the two-dimensional slices are important for building libraries that kind of work in that ML modeling phase. Well,
Mhm.
what are we competing against there, and why would we want to prioritize that over something else? And this is
Mhm.
all just because we have limited resources. We can only do things in certain priority orders and whatever. So if that one, though, somehow does line up with an AI story that we think is
Mhm.
important, then we would prioritize that higher. So that's where the other dimension of
Yeah.
this sort of proposal process is.
And do you have like areas that you're particularly interested in seeing Go used for? So, I think you mentioned earlier, you want all sorts of developers to be able to use Go, and you've said, you want it on the Android store. So I presume that's things like games and other stuff. But is there are there sort of verticals that you're particularly focused on? Obviously, you just mentioned AI as probably a big upcoming vertical that everyone's thinking about. But then you look at something like Python that owns a lot of that space already and has done a really good job with library support. Other sort of Other areas that you specifically think this is what Go is about? This is where we're focused on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is like a bit of our history, I think, where we started out as this kind of infrastructure
Mhm.
language, infrastructure, SRE, command line tools, a lot of like cloud specific stuff, and you see that, you see huge platforms built in
Mhm.
Go, like Kubernetes, Docker, Istio, whatever else. A lot of the cloud is honestly just built in Go, not just
Mhm.
GCP, but AWS and Azure and others. So it's kind of become this language of the cloud,
Mhm.
and that though, we saw like a lot of usage on this kind of like business critical infrastructure layer,
Mhm.
microservices, so we see a lot of that. The next pivot we made, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, was towards enterprise adoption, but
Mhm.
not just in that infrastructure way, more in that kind of server application way, the way you might see a Java or C# application today. Um, And then there's some nuance on this too. We don't think anyone's going to rewrite their existing Java or C# applications in Go, but we want them to see the value in it if there's a new product being created in greenfield development or something where it might make sense. I don't think anyone's going to rewrite what isn't broken or fix what isn't broken, right? And so that is what it is. But when these new things come, when these technological shifts occur, we want to be sure that we're aligned there, if it makes sense, and that we're providing value. We're not missing anything. Like, is there an integration we don't know about, or something of that sort? So, I wouldn't say like a vertical, like I wouldn't say we're focused on an industry or something of this sort. But what I would say is that we are looking at tech trends and we're trying to be sure that Go has that is producing that value that always sort of was its underpinning, which was making it really easy to productively build, these business critical production systems. Infrastructure was the one thing, and now it's really these server applications as well. And there may be more, like as this AI thing emerges, I wonder where we fit in that whole thing. And that's something that we try to do. Like we do have a lot of evidence that folks love using Go for data processing, which I see is like an earlier stage of this AI work. And maybe that's something we ought to bolster, figure out what we can do better about. I also see a lot of like new production servers being written in Go, and not AI necessarily, just in general. And I see that trend if you look at it like on a quarter by quarter basis, like say in open source projects or other publicly available data, you'll see that Go is actually one of very few languages that's growing in terms of that kind of usage. TypeScript and Rust being the others. Rust off a smaller baseline, but Go's really growing there. So if Go continues to grow in that direction, and we see a whole lot of new products emerge in this new AI reality, where absolutely just new stuff is being written. Well, I think the value prop of Go is really there, and it's an opportunity for it to grow, for it to sort of provide that value. And we just got to be sure that we're not missing anything, or we're not like keeping our eye off or losing sight of the objective.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole AI thing's really interesting, especially with relation to Google in many ways. I know there was the big demo a couple of years ago of Google's AI products that got a lot of backlash from the media. And I was reading a really interesting article on this a couple of days ago about how there was such a backlash that a lot of Google's AI team ended up, I think, leaving, and then other competitors, things like OpenAI and obviously ChatGPT have gained momentum, and now Google's gone into full AI mode, if you like, of wanting to own that space. And I'm sure that Google's got a hell of a lot of very cutting edge AI development going on internally that you can't talk about. But I mean, how do you see that the acceleration that it is with machine learning? We started a new Discord server for Exercism a couple of days ago. Everyone watching, if you've not joined yet, go and join. But it was quite funny to me because within like 2 hours, there was a raging debate about whether ChatGPT is real AI or real machine learning or not. And it's such like a hot topic at the moment that everyone's debating. But I think the one thing that most people agree on is there is this acceleration, and the more there's an acceleration in the core understanding of machine learning and how that's evolving, but critically there's a massive now acceleration in businesses that are trying to utilize AI, that are looking at, say, ChatGPT and thinking, how do we build products around this? How do we integrate that? And I think that is definitely going to only accelerate. So where do you see Go fitting into this new AI world? Is it something that you think Go is going to be focused on? Is it something that how do you think it's going to affect language development in general?
Yeah, so it's so hard to say. And it's like, maybe because we're early days. I also, appreciate the potential. And Google does, and and I think every business sort of does now, or will soon. And it's like there's so many different dimensions to it. Like the earliest one that we were seeing or thinking about, and I think everyone was thinking about, was this sort of code completion, but kind of like beefed up and on steroids, sort of just writing a whole lot of code for you rather than just just completing the method name or something. And you know, I'm not sure that there's any like language specific story there, like Go or not. I can think of some that are speculative, but so speculative and so early days that I'd make a fool of myself like almost immediately. So I don't know that there's what that looks like, but I am very curious and paying attention to it. Then there's these like sorts of phases of an AI powered product being created. You know, and I alluded to this in my last answer, which is so I see there's this data processing step. And Go is used, you know, some like about a third of our developers say they use Go for data processing. And the reason for that is pretty clear to me. You know, it's like you get the value of a sort of scripting language in terms of your productivity and your ability to quickly iterate something, cross compile it, whatever, anything like that. And you get the type safety and the performance of a like Go, like what you would get with something like Java, C#, whatever else. So that makes a lot of sense for those use cases. So I'd like to like think a little more about that and see if there's, you know, room for Go, or if it's worthwhile for Go to do something there. There's also then this like middle phase where I see like it's like the Python and the R and the kind of exploration phase. I don't know what Go's story there should be. You know, the two-dimensional slices that one of your viewers asked. You know, I think it applies more to this phase. I might be mistaken, but I think that's where it would be. This one's tougher because I see where Python has kind of really entrenched itself, and there's a lot of like libraries that are already built around it. Maybe you don't care about like operational efficiency as much at this stage. You care more about exploring data and like getting like a SQL plus, you know, like some data exploration tool that maybe there's a story for Go, but I don't know what it is at this stage. But the one that actually excites me, the one that I think might become the focus of our work, should there be an opportunity or something we should do, and that is productionizing these models. I think I've seen, and I've just done cursory research myself. I've seen like a lot of startups that have sprung up in the wake of ChatGPT and others, where it's just like kind of glue from like some like API layer they're getting, where someone else, say like ChatGPT, is providing an API and they're just, pumping it to their users. Go is equally good there as anything. It's not that big of an ask to build a system like that. You're really relying on some other party to do that work for you, and you're just in charge of trying to get your product out to the masses and all the other pieces of the business. So I don't know that Go has much there, but as these systems become more sophisticated, I expect that we'll see the same thing happen that we've seen in other non-AI powered systems. More use of things like Kubernetes, more like of a attention to taking your technology seriously, ensuring you don't accrue technical debt that'll slow you down later, being able to quickly get up and running, but also scaling later. That's where those stories always shined. That's where we see like in AI and non-AI use cases, that's where we see Go actually growing, what I alluded to, where Go is one of the few languages that is growing. So that's where I think the most promise lies. But it could be that there's nothing for us to really do specifically. It could just be we should continue doing the same stuff we're doing, making it more efficient, making it more productive, continuing to just do the AI agnostic, the use case agnostic stuff. But I also want to be sure we don't miss anything, because I think that might be one of those times in the timeline of software engineering where a whole lot of new products are created. It certainly seems that way. A lot of smart people certainly think so. And I think Go is the perfect choice for a lot of that. I just got to make sure that's right. So that's how I think of it.
That makes sense. To loop back to a couple of things. Firstly, you said that you still had half the answer of what does a product manager do. Do you want me to let you finish answering that first question? We're going back half an hour. I don't know if you can remember what you were going to say, but
I'll be brief. I'm sorry if I'm
no, not at all. It's interesting.
Okay, cool. I'm glad you think so. I mentioned the internal piece, right? Aligning that with our leadership, with our teams. The external piece is, a product manager is sort of like, sort of known widely as the voice of the customer. So it's not just the product manager who does that. It's the UX researchers, and it's really the engineers as well, especially on something that's developer facing, like a programming language. But my role is where it kind of like all leads to me to find that synthesis across all the priorities, the internal ones, the external stuff we're seeing, understanding what are the metrics that matter and how much do these things that we might want to do, how much might they impact those on small time horizons and long ones, and then just being sure that narrative still flows, that we have like a real story here, because that's important not only to our leadership, to external users, but also to our team. They want to know that like what they're building is actually like meaningful. Like they're passionate about Go as well. They're all thrilled to be on this project, but they want to be sure that what they're writing actually isn't just like, ad hoc, I'm going to fix this or that. They want to see the bigger story. They want to see why it matters. So I'd say that I am the kind of hub there among all these other inputs, but I share it with, Samir and Russ, Samir, the engineering director, and Russ, the team lead. So yeah, the three of us sort of share that responsibility.
Cool. Really interesting. Somebody else asked whether other language developers team have any influence on Go. So, for example, the team that's developing V8 or the team that's developing Carbon. Sorry.
Yeah. Like Google is this interesting place where it's like there's a lot of it's all a bottoms up engineering culture, and I think this is distinct, although like I said, I haven't worked at any of these other places, but it's distinct from what I've heard you'd see at a place like Amazon or Microsoft, where might be more top down. And that'll often be good because you'll get all this innovation coming from the engineers, that's like everyone's an entrepreneur here. And then it all bubbles up. And then it's bad because maybe you'll get like 5 different chat applications built all across the different the whole organization or the whole company. Languages are kind of like that too. Like they're modular, where like, no, not really. We don't really work with the Carbon team. We don't really work with any of the other teams. But also, yeah, because it all comes up to the same sort of leaders who are thinking about like, what is the cost of doing this? What is the return I'm getting on my cost? And if it was like viable to find a better together story, one where we're like, it would be really great if sort of Go and Carbon had some story together. And I'm not aware of one, but if there was, it'd be great. And because that would enable us to do more just together, leverage each other's strengths. So part of my role as a product manager, when I said this earlier, find that alignment, I look for those things, but we don't directly like, work together or influence each other like that. It's really these like discrete opportunities that we find where we can connect with one another, or when we're thinking about some bigger kind of like, what do we all sort of say our messages to the same leader who oversees all of this? How are we aligning ourselves so that it all makes sense for that leader?
That makes sense. When we were talking beforehand, you mentioned that you'd had a focus recently on supply chain security, and that in sort of the recent past and the near future. It'd be really interesting just to hear more about that from you.
Yeah. So it's like, I think the best way to answer this question is to think about like the past and the present and where we are now.
Yeah.
So the past, and I wasn't here for most of it, but the lore is that Go was born from a need to address a quickly growing scalability problem at Google, some 13, 14 years ago. That is, I think, described as 2 types of scaling problems. One, sort of colloquially say like engineering scale. You got hundreds of developers, they come and they go, and I got to have people come up to speed with something. You got to have it so that like, no one individual knows what the whole code base looks like. And so they've got to be able to reason about things they don't know about and quickly understand what they do need to know about. And that is what makes them productive. All the stuff like that. And so Go's, simplicity, its readability, its modular nature, these things all scale very well. And that was one objective of Go. The other, we'll say is like systems scale. And this is like at its simplest level, like just the operational cost of running a system, making sure that it can scale from like a small number of users to a large number of users without introducing new challenges. And then there were some things the founders sort of did, like it's the first mainstream language to have concurrency as a first class element of the language, and it's one of the ways that Go differentiated itself early on. So there's been a lot of like throughout that early phase, it was like, how do we create a language that addresses these two scaling problems? It so happened to align with the creation or the movement towards cloud. And so Go got this great like advantage where it could see that like, okay, there's a cloud sort of world on the horizon. Microservices will be used more in the cloud. Let's optimize for that. Where you got languages like C, C++, they were created before the internet was even really an important consideration for developers. So, Go is on the other side of that world where it's got all of these advantages and can kind of see what's hot, what's important, what are the trends. So, I think that's one of the sort of past principles here, addressing scale and ensuring that aligns with what the needs are of the time. Then we have the present, where I think we've reached this point now where we are having that penetration with the enterprise server application workloads, like the thing I was describing, the next evolution after sort of infrastructure. We obviously, that infrastructure is definitely there already. And now we see a lot of sort of traction with that Java, C# enterprise group. And I think that's generics is a large piece of that, like maybe one of the last sort of sticking points a lot of folks had. But also, in general, it's just the growth of the language, the credibility of the language, which brings us then to the supply chain security question. From the outset, Go has been built with security in mind. It's like security was already a big issue by the time Go was coming out. And so, the creators knew that this was something that ought to be at the highest sort of priority. And you see that in a lot of the functionality unrelated to supply chain security, like the memory safety and some other stuff. But that's one piece. But it's become clear that, and remember, Go is this exemplar open source project, or at least that's what we hope it is. This is a problem in all of open source, where people say 10 years ago would willy-nilly kind of rely on any project anywhere and not give consideration to that next thing, which is, well, what if there's a vulnerability in there? What if there's like a bad actor who kind of like injects some like hard to detect thing in some PR somewhere in some open source project, and now could affect like a whole wide swath of a language ecosystem. Like there are stories of like maybe not quite that, but some other related things where some project that's relied upon by a huge proportion of a language ecosystem is sort of like breaks, and then that means that everything downstream breaks. And so that was something we recognized early on as an issue. And then, there's SolarWinds, CodeCov, Log4j, all these sort of supply chain attacks started, like very consequential, targeted supply chain attacks started emerging. And this became like a priority. The Biden administration put out a sort of executive order on it. And Go was already there. And this is where we have this unique capability. The Go as a language, it's more than just a language that we own. We own a whole platform. We have the Go command. We have the package site, package.go.dev. We have the VS Code IDE plugin. We have a lot of different pieces to this. And what we try to do is create an end-to-end platform that developers can use from beginning to end for everything, for all the different developer touch points. Now, they don't have to, but they can. And that gives us the ability to sort of do things in a comprehensive way. Like one example is we release generics. I'm sort of digressing from security, but I'll bring it back. We release generics, and generics say we didn't own the IDE experience. 50% of Go developers say they use our plugin for VS Code. Now, if we were just relying on the sort of outside world, third-party IDE creators, which, by the way, we value, we're glad they're there for those use cases. But if we just relied on them and they, for whatever reason, could not prioritize generics for like another 6 months, well, we couldn't really release generics. We'd release it, it'd be in the language, but everyone's using this other thing, so they don't really see it, and so we're not able to deliver this end-to-end solution. So we are really excited and sort of happy with ourselves for owning this end-to-end. We leverage that ability to introduce new stuff. And that's how we can serve as an exemplar for what we think ought to be the direction of software engineering for all languages. So now bringing it back to software supply chain security, this is where we were able to do something where, we have the module mirror and proxy, checksum database, some other things that are there for security purposes, for efficiency purposes, for stability purposes, and they serve all those needs. But they also give us this ability to kind of create a centralized place where vulnerability information is gathered, kept, and then our tools, which come, so many of our users use, or almost all of our users use, then can draw from that information to kind of tell you whether the dependencies that you're relying upon have any vulnerabilities in them. We go a step further and see whether or not the code you're using actually invokes one of those vulnerabilities. This is a challenge that I think only the Go ecosystem is able to address, because you'll see in other sorts of versions of this solution, you'll get a million false positives. Ours will cut out the vast majority of those almost all the false positives, but a vast majority of the alerts. So it makes the whole job more doable when you don't have to deal with all of these, like, oh, well, does anything mean anything? I'm getting this for everything, right? That's really important in vulnerabilities. We were able to ship that because we own this end-to-end process. We also have it on our package site where, if you go to a version of a dependency you're thinking about, incorporating, we'll tell you if there's vulnerabilities out there for it. We also try to encourage this compatibility thing that we adhere to ourselves, where we ensure we have a compatibility promise. Something written for Go 1 will continue to work today. And we try to get all of our library authors to sort of adhere to that as well. Perhaps in the future, something we've thought about is maybe trying to demonstrate more to users how much those libraries are adhering to SEMVer and not introducing breaking changes, because we know that is a security risk. If you determine there's a vulnerability, but you also find that fixing that vulnerability is a whole lot of work, well, arguably it's not as secure. And so, ensuring that remediation process is secure is another thing we think about. So I don't know how sexy all of this is in terms of what developers today think about when choosing a language, but it is really important especially for critical infrastructure. And so I expect that over time it will become even more important in developers' minds. And Go is already sort of leaps and bounds ahead there, where we're going to continue to push on that to ensure that supply chain security is taken seriously, that we have all the sort of best practices in place, that we have the tooling to sort of be the exemplar for what every language ecosystem ought to do. Because as open source sort of becomes a more important piece of everything, we need that in order to be sure sort of that greater picture is taken care of.
There's a huge looming storm that I don't know if you're aware of as well with Docker Hub at the moment. I don't know if you've picked up on this in the last week or so, but Docker Hub have basically just announced that if you have, from what I understand, if you have just open source Docker images on there, if you have more than 3 people in your team, you have to start paying for an account. Otherwise, they're in 30 days going to remove all of the images off Docker Hub that are in free teams. So I know already in the last couple of days, I saw Jose Valem, Creative Elixir, tweeting about this yesterday, just being like, this is ridiculous. And we're now having to probably move all of our stuff off Docker Hub and move it onto GitHub packages and stuff as well. But I think it's interesting to see how, one organization like Docker with Docker Hub are able to make that sort of business decision for them that has that then huge knock-on effect. It's a bit like the pad left thing for JavaScript, but at you know, a different level of the abstraction. You know, it's not a coding thing. It's actually like the Docker images that you're relying on to build your container is just about to disappear off the internet, and suddenly, you know, you won't be able to. So I think it's an example of where this is about to sort of be on everyone's mind, I think, as just Docker images start disappearing off the internet in 24 days from now, whatever's left, and carnage is about to ensue. And I think it's interesting to think of that more closed, I don't know if closed ecosystem is the right phrase, but, you know, with Google owning that whole ecosystem from start to finish, you know, in a lot of ways that protects a lot of things. There's also a bit of me with my anarchist hat on. I have like a capitalist hat on one ear and an anarchist hat on another ear. Always. The anarchist side is a bit like, you know, is there a risk in a company owning that from start to finish? You know, does that level of control that Google end up having over large swathes of technology, is that something that is talked about to you by developers as a risk? Do people worry about that, or do the net positives of not having, say, the Docker Hub issue that's about to happen or the pad left issue, do you find that evens out in people's opinions?
Yeah. Hard, you know, it's all sort of anecdotes. I hear both,
Yeah.
right? And so hard to say if it evens out. And I think the trade-offs are sort of like obvious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one distinction that I'll make is that Go is an open source project.
Mm-hmm.
Everything we do is open source, and we host it on GitHub. And so if we were to really go off the rails, there is always the opportunity to sort of continue doing the work somewhere else.
Uh-huh.
But the benefits are there, right? Like Google does fund this project. I know that there are like mixed feelings about trusting a company like Google.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that. You know, it's like from my perspective on the inside, I can see that like there isn't anything sort of evil going on. That it'd almost be like too much work for a company like Google to figure out how to do something evil with all of this. You know, it's like you overestimate the sort of ability of Google to be evil about all this. But it is always possible that, you know, I mean, anything can happen, right? And so I can't foresee all of it. I think I've heard both of these sorts of things. I personally, you know, and not just because Google pays me, but I personally think that the value that Google is providing by funding Go and giving it the kind of the spotlight that it does is worth a lot. And I think there's going to be those obvious sorts of like, well, then what happens if Google decides to do something that I don't agree with in Go? Well, I mean, that might happen anywhere. And so really, are we thinking that like Google in particular might do something that is commercial, you know, something that suits its business interests that wouldn't suit the developer's interests? But, you know, as a sort of set at the start, Google is one of these uniquely situated places in the scheme of like technology companies, where Google actually really does just care to make the internet a better, safer place where software engineering is like, you know, sort of follows the best practices that are reasonably agreed upon. And Google does participate in all sorts of like, you know, foundations and other kinds of like collaborations with outside entities. These are all important. Creating developer trust is really important. It's like, you know, Google might end up doing things that are so far removed from its business interests just to build that trust. That trust is like a valued thing. But, you know, on some level, it is Google, and it's huge, and you know, it serves ads, and so there's going to be a contingent of people who are always skeptical and wish it wasn't that way. And I think they're wrong, but I understand.
Yeah. Okay, that's a perfectly good answer. I like that. One question that was asked is around Google having such a small standard library, and about how people who are coming from other languages, I think someone said they'd come from Java, coming in and being surprised that with what a small standard library Google Go has, and how much reliance there is. Is there a particular philosophy? I think there is, but philosophy around Go keeping that standard library small. Is that something you can talk to?
I'm not sure. I don't know enough about that, and I've not really heard that the standard library is that small. I think what I have heard about the standard library, or what I know about the standard library, is that it's almost confusingly robust and versatile. And maybe that's part of the underpinning of that question. Like sort of adjacent to this is the question of why we don't have like a formal server framework, like something like Spring for Java. And the reason for that is because the standard library can stand up all those same things. Like you don't actually need a framework like you would in Java to be able to create sort of this whole like an API service readily. That's already taken care of from the standard library. And this also ties back to that thing I said about how Go was created in a time, like more recent time, when those things were already obvious and the creators were able to put that up front and center in the beginning. So it's a long way of saying that, like, I don't know. Maybe I'm not well versed enough in terms of like the size of the standard library versus the other languages, but its robustness has created a lot of confusion. I think it's like trying to straddle this thing where we're like, no, we like that we've provided you all this flexibility. You only need to learn Go. You don't have to also then go learn this bulky framework on top of it. It's just Go. We don't want to make it hard. We don't even provide you like a sort of like authoritative view on how you ought to structure your application. You can do it any way you want. And people often don't like that. They say like, oh, well, I don't know how to get started. And it's like, I get it. Like in every other sort of template or setup thing that another language might offer you, they give you like sort of guidance. Put your files here, put these in this folder, whatever. And we don't do that. And I wonder how much of this sort of is part of the same story, but it's probably also something I just don't know enough about.
Okay, that makes sense. So projecting forward, like 5 years, 10 years, maybe too far into the future of Go, if you were to imagine how the language evolves from where it is now to what it looks like then, are there any things that you feel in terms of direction it's going in a certain way that would be significantly different? You talked about generics being maybe one of the sort of big final stepping stones to get to a certain point, but are there other things that you see over the next 5-10 years that people should be looking out for?
So hard to say 10 years, right?
Yeah.
But
Long time.
Though the one thing I will say for sure is this security piece seems very important. The one I already spent a lot of time talking about. I think you'll continue to see us set the bar there for what other language ecosystems have to do, and I expect many will copy what Go does there. And by the way, we're happy about that. We want that.
Yeah.
Continue copying and building the stuff that makes everybody more secure. So that's one thing. I could also see this whole shift into AI-powered products either changing or causing us to build some integration stuff that I can't really foresee right now, and maybe nobody can foresee. That I could see that being an important vector. I could also see the language kind of just iterating the way that it has been. You won't see anything that's so magically different, because really that's another sort of thing here is we try to be boring. We try not to introduce a bunch of stuff. That's not really what makes a good programming language necessarily, not one that's constantly changing. It's more about the stability. The compatibility promise I in 10 years will be there. There won't be a Go version 2. Version 1 is the last one, and so everything you'll ever find from here on out, as far as I can see, but it's a real commitment as well, to be clear, will always be compatible. So we're constrained by that. And I could see, though, that these sort of paradigm shifts, like this AI paradigm shift, maybe there will be another one after that, like a derivative of the AI one. I see that as opportunities for new products to be written, new code to be written, new companies to emerge, existing companies being pressured to adapt. And that's where I think we'll see more Go adoption. It's like, it said this earlier, that nobody wants to fix what isn't broken. And that's in something like a programming language where you're thinking really long term, like it's not you don't expect everyone to be like, oh, I'm going to rewrite everything that I have here. Like I have 100 Java servers, I'm going to change them all to Go. Even in the regular course of things, you'll see I have 100 Java servers. I'll make number 101 Java as well. That's really what you see. But sometimes you see these shifts, you see these real wholesale changes. And I don't know, but I think we'll have at least one of those over the course of the next 10 years. And if that happens, then I think we'll see Go way more widely adopted. Like I could see it really, like we haven't seen anything yet,
There's another question about WebAssembly. And the question is Go good for WebAssembly? But I guess thinking of WebAssembly as an evolving technology, is that something that's on your radar as how that's evolving?
It's definitely on my radar, no doubt about it. I don't know if I prioritize it higher than the security work or exploring what the AI work is looking like. WebAssembly sounds really promising to me, but it sounded that way for several years now, and I'm not sure that I've seen anything that sort of validates that feeling for me. Not to put it down though, because I really do think it's a very interesting space and one that I really hope does succeed. And it honestly would be a benefit to Go because I think it kind of levels the playing field for what you are, like what languages you use to create something. Like it gives you more flexibility, and that's maybe where Go, because we win on the sort of merits there for the productivity and the other things, we would become a more appealing option for developers. For now, though, I don't think the story has evolved enough for us to say, and I don't know that we've like leaned into it the way I've seen some other languages like Rust lean into it either.
Interesting. Talking about Rust, one question is, will Go introduce a new syntax or operator that's similar to Rust's question mark operator? So you can avoid typing if error doesn't equal nil, then do this. I know that Go is like, well, I'm not a Go developer, but I understand that Go is light on syntax, and that's like, again, part of like Go's remit. Do you see adding new syntax like this into the language as something that's going to happen, or do you feel like the sort of lighter syntax is where Go will remain?
It can. That specifically has been talked about a lot internally, and there are proposals and other things of that sort. It's error handling in particular, I think, is this sort of divisive topic. I personally love the way it is right now, but I come from like an old C background, and maybe that's why I like it this way. But there's always, since I've been paying attention, always been a lot of emphasis on error handling in particular, a new syntax potentially to make that easier. There's some inside the Go team who are real excited about that idea, some who are more skeptical, but the whole thing needs to go through a real slow, boring proposal and review process, because that I think is more important than anything else, which is let's be really deliberate about what we do.
Yeah, there was another question as well about lazy evaluation earlier, and if there are any plans to add lazy evaluation into Go. If people want to learn more about this, are there like proposals out there where they can be tracking some of this conversation that's going on?
Yeah, definitely. Go to the Go GitHub project on GitHub, and you'll see everything about like the proposal process there, how you can follow it, how you can propose yourself. Actually, and so those are welcome as well. And you'll see how the comments work, how the sort of evaluation is done. To lazy evaluation in particular, I don't know. That I've not seen too much about, but I'm also not the authority on it. So, I don't want to speak to it incorrectly.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, I think we are there with questions. I think we're pretty much done. Unless there's anything else that you wanted to touch on, Cameron, about anything else in general about this that you want to talk to people about.
Yeah, I feel like I've said a lot, but I will say first of all, I really appreciate this opportunity, and I appreciate that those who tuned in, asked questions, all of that. I really value the community. If there's one thing that I've gotten out of my experience as the product lead of Go, is the opportunity to meet people who really care about Go. I think of the other sorts of, so the other products I've worked on at Google, nobody feels that strongly about, but Go developers really care, and that's empowering for everybody. I think it's empowering for the community itself, but it's also empowering for folks like me and others on the Go team, where we know that what we're doing is sort of meaningful. I'm also really bullish on the future of Go. Like, I feel very excited about it. I think there's a long road when you're dealing with the programming language. It's potentially the longest road I can think of, of all tech products to create. And so, like, there will be setbacks, there will be kinds of like ups and downs and everything, but Go just consistently impresses me. And I think part of that is what Russ and others have done, like the dividends that continue to pay off by being so principled in leading this community and creating like a language that follows principles that have been reasoned about and everything else. And plus, they're just super smart people. But it's also just the momentum that the community has created as a result. It's like there's some people who really love Go for that same reason. So that gives me a lot of energy. I think that in the next several years, the question you asked, what do I see 5-10 years from now? I think it'll be really important for Go. I think we're on the precipice, like we've gotten past this point where we had early adopters, and that's always a particular type of crowd. And they gave us a lot of feedback early on. We iterated, whatever. Then we got to this point where we had this mass adoption in the cloud space with these big projects using Go becoming almost like the default language of the cloud. That was a really big win for Go. And then this crossing of the chasm into early mainstream adoption. That's what you see with enterprise usage. And if you kind of look at where that sort of chart goes, like it feels like we're in that nook, of that hockey stick where it's like, I really see a confluence of factors coming together that give us the opportunity to build this thing up, to make it realize its full potential. But we got to do that by paying attention to the community and being sure that, what we do doesn't sort of, that it's always responsive to the needs of the community and the coming trends and the coming needs. So, I guess to save myself from rambling further, I just say I'm very excited, and I think that the community is a big part of that.
Awesome. Really, really appreciate that and agree. I mean, Exercism community is everything to us as well. And I think, you can't, doing anything like this is about the people you're doing it with. It's about bringing people together and having fun building things together, both with those core teams of people that are involved day to day, but the wider people that are just using what you're building and everything else. It's a super exciting place. There's lots of opportunities to get involved in the Go community. I just want to shout out again to Go Bridge, who are an organization to help less advantaged people get into Go, and Bridge Foundry in general help with lots of languages. So if you want to help out mentoring on Go Bridge, if you're experienced or you're looking for a way in, Go Bridge is definitely something to check out as well. And the Go Developer Network is a whole series of events all over the world where people meet up and chat about Go and network around Go and explore it together. So you can check out the GDN, the Go Developer Network as well, and get involved in some of their events. Cameron, thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. It's been really eye-opening, really interesting. I hope have you back sometime in the future and you can give us an update in a year or two on how Go's evolving. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'd love that. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I enjoy this a lot.
Awesome. To everyone that's watching, we've got a couple more big interviews coming up. Simon Peyton Jones, who is creator of Haskell, and Bjarne, I'm going to totally destroy the guy's name, who I'm going to not even embarrass myself, who is the creator of C++ as well. We're just firming those dates up, but I think one will be at the end of this month, and I think Simon will be mid-April. So keep your ears open for both of those as well. Thanks again, Cameron. Thank you everyone for watching. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.